Moral Objectivism and a Punishing God by Hagop Sarkissian from the City University of New York Graduate Center, Baruch College. The abstract. Many moral philosophers have assumed that ordinary folk embrace moral objectivism. But if so, why do folk embrace objectivism? One possibility is the pervasive connection between religion and morality in ordinary life. Some theorists contend that God is viewed as a divine guarantor of right and wrong, rendering morality universal and absolute. But is belief in God per se sufficient for moral subjectivism? Objectivism. In this paper, we present original research exploring the connection between metaethics and particular conception of God among religious participants. Study 1 shows that when controlling for religiosity age and belief in God's loving characteristics, it is belief in God's punishing characteristics, specifically the existence of hell, that uniquely predicts rejection of moral relativism. Study 2 shows that followers of Abrahamic faiths are more likely to endorse moral objectivism when thinking of the divine, regardless of loving or punishing characteristics. And study 3 shows that priming for moral objectivism makes theists more likely to endorse God's punishing characteristics. A general picture of is suggested by this data. For Abrahamic theists, God's particular characteristics are not germane to the question of whether these moral commandments are real or objective, and while theists strongly endorse God's loving characteristics, focusing on the objective nature of morality can highlight God's punishing nature, reminding theists that objective morality requires a divine guarantor of justice to enforce it. Since ancient time, great minds have drawn a connection between morality and the divine. For example, in the laws from circa 4th century BCE, Plato writes that fear of such vengeance exacted by the gods should hold a man in check, and that no one who believes in gods, as the law directs, ever voluntarily commits an unholy act or lets any lawless word pass his lips. Around the same time, the Mohids in pre-dynastic China, circa 4th century BCE, were arguing that if the ability of gods and spirits to reward the worthy and punish the wicked could be firmly established as fact throughout the empire and among the common people, it would surely bring order to the state and great benefit to the people. This connection continues in modern times, as when in famous passage from the brothers Karamazov, Ivan Fyodorovich opines that if there is and has been any law on earth up to now, it has come not from natural law, but solely from people's belief in their own immortality. This thinker suggests that religious beliefs is conducive to, perhaps even necessary, for moral or pro-social behavior, and some contemporary psychological research has uncovered such connections. But the connection between morality and religious belief can also be drawn at a higher level of analysis. Some have maintained, for example, that God not only punishes people for disobeying his commands, but also instantiates, realizes, or constructs objective morality ex nihilo. On this view, in the absence of God, morality itself, conceived in absolute law-like terms, could not exist. Hobbes gives voice to such a position in Leviathan when he writes that only principles delivered in the word of God, that by right commandeth all things, are properly called laws. Nietzsche offers a radically different account that also affirms a strong connection between belief in gods and belief in objective morality. In the genealogy of morality, They speculates that slaves in the ancient world yearned for revenge against their masters, yet were powerless to act. Their frustration generated a compensatory belief that a noble god exists, is able to detect the objective evil in their masters, and will therefore punish them, even when the slaves themselves could not. The desire for revenge then generates not only belief in God, but also belief in supernatural punishment as well as existence of objective moral facts. Freud too maintained that people create a supernatural supreme court of justice to ensure that all good is rewarded and all evil punished. In this paper, we set out to investigate the connection between morality and religious belief at this higher level of analysis, to wit the connection between belief in God and belief in moral objectivism. Many contemporary philosophers maintain that ordinary folk are objectivist about morality. While multiple explanations could be offered for this, it seems prima facie that morality grounded in a theistic conceptual framework could help explain why ordinary folk embrace objectivism. After all, when the philosophers mentioned above make claims about ordinary folk, they are primarily referring to individuals who believe in monotheistic God, whose commandments apply absolutely and to everyone, regardless of their contingent beliefs of desire. So it might seem only natural for someone who believes in God to believe that some moral dictates stem from divine command are objectively true and apply to all people. Others have investigated this theistic explanation for folk objectivism. Godwin and Early, for example, support such an explanation, reporting that how people ground or justify their moral beliefs can predict whether they are objectivists about morality. In one of their experiments, they assessed participants to commitments to moral objectivism by presenting them with a number of cases of moral disagreement and asking whether they thought that it was possible for both sides to be correct. Later, they asked the participants how they grounded their morality beliefs by having them select from several meta-ethical justifications, including a divine command justification. This was followed by another question. According to you, is it possible for there to be right and wrong acts without the existence of God? They found that participants who grounded their moral beliefs in the divine command, they are ordained by Supreme Being, were more objective than those who did not. What's more, if participants answered the last question by claiming that there could be no right or wrong without God, or even if they were unsure, they were more objectivist too. However, the result failed to replicate in some further research. More recently, Yilmaz and Bacek-Pali in 2015 explored the relationship between religious belief and moral objectivism in a more systematic way. In order of their priming studies, participants primed with divinity concepts in a scrambled sentence task such as spirit, divine, and good, endorsed moral objectivism and rejected moral relativism to a greater extent than did participants in a neutral prime condition. Yet, they also found evidence for a causal connection running the other way. In a subsequent study, when participants were primed to think of morality in subjective terms by reading a text that contrasted a moral claim with a highly objective scientific claim, they evidenced lower levels of confidence in their belief in God. The studies by Gowen and Darrell suggest a correlation between belief in God and an objectivist conception of morality. Yilmaz and Bacek-Pali suggest causal connection. When people think of religious concepts, they are more likely to endorse a moral objectivism. Conversely, when they are primed with moral subjectivism, they show lower levels of religiosity. Both of these studies provide support for the theistic explanation of folk objectivism. However, a more nuanced possibility is suggested when considering these findings in light of other research suggesting that what matters for individual morality is not belief per se, but how things of God. For example, Sharif and Norenzayan in 2011 found that how participants characterized God predicted their moral behavior. When given a chance to chat in an experimental setting, participants who emphasized punishing aspects of God were less likely to do so compared to those who emphasized loving and merciful aspects of God. Similarly, Johnson et al. In 2013 found that belief in a punishing God correlated with more aggressive and less forgiving responses to imagined social transgression, while Ilmaz and Bachpali, that we quoted before, found that priming participants with punishment, whether religious or secular, led to increased pro-social interaction. In other research, Sharif and Retmula in 2012 found that across 67 countries, belief in hell was negatively correlated with overall crime rates, whereas belief in heaven was positively correlated with higher crime rates, even when controlling for GDP, income inequality, and other predictors of crime. Other findings support the diverging impact of endorsing God's loving as opposed to punishing aspects. How do we make sense of these results? One approach would emphasize the relationship between conceptualization of God and views about morality. If belief in moral objectivism is correlated with conceiving God as punishing or vengeful, or opposite to loving or forgiving, the previous pattern of results begins to make sense. Those who believe in a punishing God may be less likely to cheat and also less likely to forgive because they consider moral transgression as objectively wrong. To investigate this idea, we conducted 3 studies. The first showed a correlation between believing in a punishing God and rejecting moral relativism. The second and third explored the causal connection between these 2 variables. This investigating is of interest in at least 2 ways. First, it is of theoretical interest because it constitutes a novel investigation into the causal relationship between particular beliefs about God and moral objectivism. Second, it is of practical interest because, as noted, the connection between objectivist morality and belief in a punishing God could have implications for religious conflict, outgroup religious partiality, and the prospect of tolerance and cosmopolitanism. A note about agnostic and atheist. In the following studies, we investigate a potential relationship between belief in moral objectivism and conception of God. However, agnostics and atheists do not believe in God and therefore cannot be predicted to conceive of God as having loving or punishing characteristics. Thus, for the studies below, we eliminated any participants who selected atheist, agnostics, none, in response to the question, "What is your religion?" presented in the demographics phase of the following studies. However, for the interest of transparency, we conducted analysis for atheists and report the single marginally significant result for study 3 in the supplementary materials SM, along with a post hoc interpretation of this finding. We report all measure, manipulation, and exclusion in the study below. Study number 1. In this initial study, we tested a correlation between belief in hell, taken as proxy for belief in punishing God, and rejection of moral relativism about morality. Method. Participant sample size was determined before any data analysis using G power 3.1. We took a medium size effect 0.30 as our threshold of interest. A 95% power of detecting such an effect required a sample of about 165 participants. We therefore recruited 360 participants using Amazon.com's mechanical Turk service, expecting to eliminate a considerable number of atheists and non-believers from the sample. In total, 356 participants completed the study, including 230 self-reported tastes. Of these, 41 failed a basic comprehension check, leaving 189 for the analysis below. 110 women, mean age 40.15, SD equals to 11.85, range between 21 and 81. Of these, 84.1% identified some denomination of Christianity as their religious affiliation. See SM for full details. Based on our final sample of 189 participants, a two-tailed test of significance and an alpha level of 0.05, a sensitivity analysis using G power 3.1 indicated an 80% power to detect an effect size of 0.20 in a bivariate correlational analysis. Participants were given monetary compensation for their participation at the end of the study. Materials and procedure. Participants were presented with a 5-item moral relativism scale in randomized order adopted from 14th 1980, see the CM, and asked to mark their agreement or disagreement with each on a 7-point scale. All relativism scale items were highly internally consistent, Cronbach's alpha equal 0.82, and were averaged to form a relativism score for each participant. Participants then answered a number of demographic questions, including the Duke University religiosity dual scale, as reported by Koenig and Bussing in 2010. The dual scale consists of 5 questions which are subdivided into 3 subscales, measuring 1. Organizational religious activity, 2. Non-organizational religious activity, and 3. Intrinsic religiosity, CSM. Since we are interested in how one's religious beliefs are related to one's thought about nature and status of morality, we predicted that one's level of intrinsic religiosity could moderate the relationship between the other variables of interest in our study. Thus, we use this subscale Cronbach's alpha equal 0.90 in all analyses. Finally, we assessed participant endorsement of the loving and punishing aspects of God by asking them about their belief in heaven and hell on 7-point scale, following the logic of Sharif and Rehmullah in 2012 as part of a final demographic questionnaire. Participants were then debriefed and given $0.50 for their participation. Results and discussion. Result: relativism was negatively correlated with intrinsic religiosity. R 187 equal minus 0.21, P equal 0.004 belief in hell, R 187 equal minus 0.21, P equal 0.003, and belief in heaven here R187 equal minus 0.15, P equals 0.034. Intrinsic religiosity was highly correlated with both belief in heaven, R187 equal 0.67, P inferior to 0.001, and belief in hell, R 187 equal to 0.58, P inferior to 0.001. Belief in hell was negatively correlated with age, R 187 equals minus 0.15, and P equal 0.037, suggesting a form of motivated cognition, for example, as found in Marter and Carl Stersen in 2005. To further test the significance of these predictors, we performed a multiple regression analysis using belief in heaven, belief in hell, intrinsic religiosity, and age, which has been shown to predict objectivism, baby, and sacrifice in 2016. As a predictor variables and objectivism as the outcome variable. In this complete model, belief in a punishing God emerged as the sole significant predictor of rejection of relativism for taste, see table 1. Taking belief in hell as a proxy for belief in a punishing God and relativism as the reverse of objectivism, this study finds an initial correlation between believing in a punishing God and endorsing moral objectivism. Discussion. We might now ask, does belief in a punishing concept of God drive taste toward moral objectivism, or does a commitment to moral objectivism make them conceive of God in punishing terms? We can see this question as the heart of a very old debate in metaethics, and that harkens back to the discussion of Hobbes and Nietzsche over the relation between God and morality. However, whereas this previous discussion concerned belief in God generally, our correlational findings suggest a modification. Perhaps, in the spirit of Hobbes, individuals think of morality in objective terms when they conceive of God as an infallible, omnipotent punisher. Or perhaps, in the spirit of Nietzsche, they are likely to endorse a punishing God to the extent that they affirm moral objectivism. Some observations support each of these models. For example, one does not generally select one initial religious affiliations, but is rather reared in the religion of one's parents or community, where one might be exposed both to a particular conception of God and the conception of morality consistent with that God. This would support the Hobbesian model. By contrast, many individuals do switch religion affiliation later in life. By one count, 28% of US adults forsake the religion they were raised in, changing from Catholicism to Protestantism or atheism, and this number increased to nearly half, 44% of US adults, if one considers changes within religious tradition, for example, from Baptist to Methodist. This result had been reported on the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life in 2008. Adults might be gravitating toward religions that portray God as affirming their mature moral conviction. This will support the Nietzschean model. Of course, it could also be both of these models contribute to the connection between belief in a punishing God and moral objectivism. We set out to investigate each of these models in the studies below. Study 2. In this study, aligned with a modified Hobbesian model, we predicted that priming tastes with the concept of a punishing God would increase their awards of a moral objectivism method. Participle sample size was determined before any data analysis using G power 3.1. We took a medium effect f of 0.25 as our threshold of interest for the current study, which required a total sample size of about 160 tastes with an 80% chance of detecting any effect. Needing to eliminate a taste from our sample and expecting to eliminate participants because of failure to correctly complete the task or the comprehension check, we decided to collect at least 500 participants. In all, 538 participants were recruited using Amazon.com's Mechanical Turk service, self-reported atheists and agnostics, n equal to 202 were excluded from the analysis, leaving a sample of 336 tastes. 53 of these participants failed a comprehension check and were removed from the sample, leaving 283 participants. 13 of these participants failed to follow the instruction for the sentence scramble task correctly and were removed from the sample, leaving 217 participants. Finally, each author independently coded participants' responses to 3 funnel questions, testing for suspicion of the purpose of the study. Criteria were established through discussion of a subsample of the cases, and a dichotomous categorization was given to each participant, indicating either obliviousness to or awareness of the purpose of the study. Inter-rater reliability was substantial, kappa equal to 0.798, while p inferior to 0.001, with agreement on 269 of 270 cases. After resolving this disagreement, only 2 participants were removed for suspecting the purpose of the study. In all, 68 days were excluded from our sample as follows: 14 from divine loving, 6 from divine punishing, 16 from divine neutral, 13 from neutral loving, 11 from neutral punishing, and 8 from neutral. The remaining sample of 268 participants, 171 women, mean age equals to 35, ST equal 11.48, range from 18 to 68, were distributed across our 6 conditions as follows: divine loving equal to 37, divine punishing equal to 49, divine neutral equal to 46, neutral loving equal to 36, neutral punishing equal to 30, neutral equal to 60. Of these, 74.2% identified some denomination of Christianity as their religious affiliation. See SM for full details. Based on our final sample of 268 participants and an alpha level of 0.05, a sensitivity analysis using G power 3.1 indicated an 80% power to detect an effect size of 0.19 in an ANOVA. Materials and procedure. In these 2, divinity, divine prime, neutral prime, per 3, attitude, loving prime, punishing prime, neutral prime. Prime student investigated the modified Objectivism model using a sentence Scrabble prime similar to that used by Ilmas and Bakchekpali in 2015 and 2016, and originally devised by Sharif and Norenzayan in 2007. Participants were given 10 groups of 5 words each and were required to discard one and form a meaningful 4-word sentence. Those in the divine condition, and to include words intended to prime concepts related to the divine, spirit, divine, God, and sacred for 4 of these word groups, and those in the loving, love, forgave, peacefully, and kind, and punishing, harsh, punishing, angry, and revenge condition were similarly primed. 2 participants in divine loving and divine punishing condition unscrabbled 2 neutral sentences and 8 sentences containing prime words, 4 related to divinity and 4 related to loving or punishing respectively. Participants in neutral loving, neutral punishing, or divine neutral condition unscrabbled 6 neutral sentences and 4 sentences containing prime words related to loving, punishing, or the divine respectively. And participants in the control condition unscrabbled neutral sentences containing no prime words. See SM for further details. After the priming task, participants completed a 3-item moral objectivism questionnaire. In study 1, we took relativism as the reverse of objectivism from a folk psychological perspective, and on that basis interpreted our findings and supported our primary thesis, namely that belief in a punishing God is correlated with the belief in moral objectivism for taste. Here we test for objectivism directly with the following new 3-item scale. Number 1, there exists a single moral code that is applicable to everyone, regardless of any individual person's belief or cultural identity. Number 2, if two people really disagree about a particular moral problem, then at most one of them can be correct, since moral problems cannot have multiple correct answers. Number 3, it is possible to compare different cultures by a single universal standard of moral rightness. Response to the 3 items were highly internally consistent. Cronbach's alpha equal to 0.81, and they were averaged to form a single objectivism measure. Not only did this 3-item scale differ from the measure used in study 1 by testing objectivism direct as opposed to testing for rejection of relativism, it was also not based on previous measures. We were concerned that existing measures such as 5-item scales adapted from Forsyth, as in 1980, did not capture meta-ethical views in a precise way, potentially limiting what we can infer from their use in this context. CSM for further discussion. After completing our objectivism measure, each participant answered a series of 3 final questions intended to assess suspicion of the purpose of the study. Finally, participants completed a short demographic survey, including the dual intrinsic religiosity items, Cronbach's alpha equals 0.92, which were averaged to a single intrinsic religiosity measure. Participants were then debriefed and given $1 for their participation. Results and discussion. A 2 divinity per 3 attitude ANOVA was used to compare the influence that priming divinity and dispositional attitude had on endorsement of objectivism for the taste. There was no significant effect for divinity. F1 266 equal 1.80, P equal 0.181, eta P square equal 0.007, or attitude F2 265 equal 0.13, P equal to 0.876, eta P square equal to 0.001, nor was there an interaction effect F2 265 equal to 0.15, P equal 0.862, eta P square equal to 0.001. CSM for means and SDs by condition. We did not find an effect in study 2 supporting the modified Hobbes explanation of the correlation between belief in a punishing God and meta-ethical objectivism. This might suggest that our methodology for priming concept related to a punishing God did not work, especially when considering that Yilmaz and Bachepali in 2015 found a medium-large effect for divinity and objectivism in their second study, using a similar design. However, a closer examination of our result supports a different hypothesis. First, whereas our sample consists of 74% Christians, with a single denomination comprising more than 20%, 90% of the theists in Yilmaz and Bachepali's samples reported identification with Islam. One possible explanation for the disparity between our result and theirs might be that Muslim, or followers of Abrahamic religions in general, are more susceptible to the religious primes, while our sample comprised only a small number of Muslims. We decided to test this hypothesis by focusing on self-reported followers of Abrahamic religions, Protestant, Catholics, Evangelicals, other Christians, Jews, and Muslims, n equal to 209. Indeed, ANOVA uncovered a main effect of divinity on levels of objectivism for this group. F1207 equal 4.02, P p equal to 0.046, eta p square equal to 0.9, see figure 1. Abrahamics primed with divinity concept indicated with higher levels of agreement, m equal to 4.11, sd equal to 1.59, with our objectivist statements than those in non-religious neutral condition, m equal to 3.68, sd equal to 1.43. No other significant main or interaction effects were found for Abrahamics, nor were any significant main or interaction effects found for non-Abrahamic theists, n equal to 59. Our primary aim with this study was to test our modified Bayesian model, the hypothesis that thinking of a punishing God influences one to adopt objectivist metaethical beliefs. We did not find clear evidence for this hypothesis. However, we did find that priming members of Abrahamic traditions with concepts of the divine made them significantly more inclined to endorse metaethical objectivism. This suggests that our divinity primes were successful. However, we also want to err a note of caution regarding these results, as controversies have been raised for priming studies, for example regarding Cesario in 2013, Willard, Sheriff and Norenzayan in 2016, as well as for statistical methods that isolate and test for predicted effects in some population, for example in Simmons, Nelson and Simonson in 2011. We thus regard the result as provisional, even though their outlook may be somewhat strengthened by their concordance with their similar findings of Filmans and Bachapel in 2015. Study number 3. Here, in line with the Nietzschean model outlined above, we predicted that priming theists with moral objectivism would increase their endorsement of the concept of a punishing God. Method: participants. Sample size was determined before any data analysis using G power 3.1. We took again a medium effect, f of 0.25 as our threshold of interest, which required a total sample size of about 150 theists with an 80% chance of detecting any effect. As with the studies above, we expected to eliminate a large number of atheists from our sample. Thus we set out to collect at least 360 participants. In all, 365 participants, 162 female, completed an online questionnaire, including 188 theists. Of these, 12 failed a basic comprehension check at the beginning, 7 in the absolute condition, 2 in the relative condition, and 3 in the control condition. And another 18 were removed from for failing a manipulation check after the prime, 8 from the absolute condition, 10 from the relative condition, leaving 168. Finally, each author independently coded participant responses to 3 funnel questions, testing for suspicion of the purpose of the study, with agreement on 166 of 168 cases, kappa equal to 0.661, p minor to 0.001, and 3 additional participants were eliminated for suspecting the purpose of the study, all from the relative condition. This left 165 for the analysis below: 82 women, mean age equals to 34.80, SD equal to 12.69, range between 19 and 73, distributed across conditions as follows: 15 objective, 51 in relative, and 64 in control. Detailed religious affiliation information can be found in supplementary materials SM. However, 80% of participants identified some denomination of Christianity as their religious affiliation. Based on our final sample of 165 participants and an alpha level of 0.05, a sensitivity analysis using G power 3.1 indicated an 80% power to detect an effect of 0.24 in a one-way ANOVA. Materials procedure. In order to induce participants to think of morality as either absolute on the one hand or relative on the other, they were randomly assigned to one of the three conditions modified from Jung and Durbin in 2013. Those in the relativism condition received the following prompt. Many thoughtful, reflective people maintain that moral rightness and wrongness are related, that they are determined solely by one's background or cultural upbringing. In other words, there are no universal moral truths. Do you agree that moral rightness and wrongness are relative, that they are determined by one's background or cultural upbringing? Those in the objectivism condition receive this prompt. Many thoughtful, reflective people maintain that moral rightness and wrongness are universal, that they are independent of one's background or cultural upbringing. In other words, there are universal moral truths. Do you agree that moral rightness and wrongness are universal, that they are independent of one's background or cultural upbringing? Those in control condition receive this prompt. Many people agree that online studies have been proven beneficial as they speed up the process of data collection and allow participants to take part in the study easily and from a variety of venues. Do you agree that online studies are beneficial for researchers and participants? Participants marked their agreement on a 7-item agreement scale. Their answers were ignored in the analysis. Next, subjects were provided with a 14-item conception of God's scale. Sharif and Norris Zion in 2011 had created it, asking to what extent they endorse God's loving characteristics, for example, forgiving, compassionate, or punishing characteristics, for example, fearsome or vengeful. All loving God items loaded on factor 1 and all punishing God items loaded on factor 2. There were no cross landings. The loving God items Chromebox alpha equal 0.92 were averaged into a single loving God scale, and the punishing God items Chromebox alpha equal to 0.90 were averaged into a single punishing God scale. This was followed by a series of funnel questions to assess their awareness of the purpose of the meta-ethics question. Finally, they provided demographic information including the 3-item Durrell intrinsic religion scale, Chromebox alpha equal 0.89. Participants were then debriefed and given $1 for their participation. Results and discussion. A one-way multivariate ANOVA was conducted to compare the effect of manipulation for ethics of loving God and punishing God in the objectivist, relativist, and control condition. There was no significant effect of condition on taste conception of God as loving being. F2 162 equals to 1.55, P equals to 0.216, eta P squared equal to 0.019. However, there was a significant effect of condition on taste conception of God as a punishing being. F2 162 equal 6.09, P equal 0.003, eta P squared equal P070 sec. You can see in figure 2. Post-hoc comparison using the Turkey test indicated that the mean score for punishing God in the objective condition M equals to 3.75, SD equal 141 was significantly higher than both the control condition M equal 2.85, SD equal 1.31, P equals 0.002, Cohen's D equals 0.77, and the relative condition M equal 3.09, SD equal 0.49, P equal 0.047, cons D equals 0.46. The relative condition did not significantly differ from the control condition, P equal 0.634, cons D equal 0.17. General discussion. In study 1, we found that even though belief in moral objectivism correlated with intrinsic religiosity, belief in a loving God as measured by belief in heaven and belief in a punishing God as measured by belief in hell, only the latter uniquely predicted objectivism. So we decided to further investigate the causal relationship between these variables. It may seem initially more likely that a causal connection runs from belief in God to moral objectivism, and we do find provisional evidence for such a connection. In study 2, prompting Abrahamic tastes to think of God whether in loving, punishing, or neutral terms had a small but significant effect on their views concerning morality, making them more likely to endorse objectivism. This coheres with the finding of Ilmaz and Bakchepeli provocatively titled paper "Without God, Everything is Permitted" in 2015. However, it might be most accurate to conclude that for followers of Abrahamic religions, without God, everything is permitted. Future research might target individuals from other religious traditions to further explore this relationship. We note that Ilmaz and Bakchepeli in 2016 found punishing crimes, whether religious or secular, increased prosociality, whereas religious crimes alone did not. Our findings have raised the possibility that one's prosocial tendencies are responsive to different crimes than one's metaethical perspectives. Future research might compare these two dimensions of the moral landscape explicitly. In study 3, we tested the Nietzschean model, whereby one metaethical commitments shape how one conceives gods. We found that being prompted to think of morality in an objectivist fashion strengthened theists' conception of God as a divine punisher, but had no effect on their conception of God as a loving being, which were uniformly high across conditions. Indeed, it is possible that ratings of loving God were at ceiling across conditions. The SD for following God was 1.02 compared to 1.44 for the punishing God. This suggests that theists may invariably conceive God as loving, forgiving, and merciful, but recognize God's punishing nature when prompted to think that there are objectively right and wrong answers to moral questions. Indeed, the most salient connection between morality and God lies in prohibition, which emphasizes God's restriction of behavior. All but one of the 10 commandments, for example, consist in prohibitions: "Thou shalt not kill, bear false witness, steal, commit adultery," etc., that imply punishments if violated. The causal story from 3 is in line with other studies suggesting a link between an individual's values and ideals on the one hand and how they conceive of the divine on the other. For example, Ross et al. In 2012 found that American Christians project their own moral ideals onto the figure of Jesus and take issues important to their own ideological orientation: fellowship and caring for liberals, moral teaching for conservatives, to be central to Christianity. So Christians tend to think Jesus will be like them. Our findings suggest similarly that theists tend to modify their conception of God based on their beliefs about the nature of morality. One way to explain this result is to note that moral education may occur at an earlier age and independently of one's religious education, especially as the latter pertains to the attributes of God. There is also some evidence that one's meta-ethical views are correlated with one's basic personality traits. Felsey-Corkley, for example, in 2008. This suggests that how one conceives the nature of morality, for example, whether diverging moralities could be equally valid, comes first and later renders some characteristics of God more salient or attractive than others. In fact, this may partially explain the previously noted finding that people often change their religious affiliation in adulthood. Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life in 2008 proved that. A general picture is suggested by data. Then, for Abrahamic theists, God's particular characteristics are not germane to the question of whether his moral commandments are real and objective. Is divine and unequivocal rule is sufficient for objective moral command, and even while God punishes immoral behavior, his commandments are issued out of care for his believers. And whereas theists generally strongly endorse God's loving characteristics, focusing on the objective nature of morality can relax God punishing characteristics, reminding theists that objective morality requires a divine guarantor of justice to enforce it. Thanks for listening this reading aloud of the article, and now I will proceed with another video with the comment.